Welcome to L&D Disrupt, the podcast dedicated to helping you overcome workplace challenges and prepare for the future of work today. I'm your host, Nelson Siblingam, and I'll be speaking with the movers, shakers, and path breakers in L&D who are reshaping their organizations right now. Join us each week as we delve into the highs and lows of work in the industry to get to the real nitty-gritty stuff that you actually care about.
In this week's episode of L&D Disrupt, we have the pleasure of speaking with Tina Phillips, VP of People, Talent and Culture at Insure. Tina has a truly impressive wealth of experience to share, from training hiring managers to acknowledge their unconscious bias, to creating a culture where everyone feels safe enough to give and receive feedback. If building a strong company culture is something you care about, then this episode is for you.
Hi Tina, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I feel like this conversation has been long overdue, Tina. So I've got a bunch of questions and things to find out. I mean, you've had an incredible track record of scaling the people function at so many high growth companies. And so I really wanted to dive into how you do that, right? There are so many challenges when you're going from 0 to 1 to 10 to 100 at that speed. Specifically, you want to look at scaling culture, right? How do you make sure, typically at an early stage company, the kind of culture is founder led and the founder's probably meeting everyone firsthand and leaving an impression. But how do you go from that to scaling the culture when the founder is no longer, meeting everyone in the team? So let's start with maybe the challenges. What are some of the most common challenges you see in organizations that are scaling really fast?
Yeah, I think a very good and broad question. So I could probably go on for a long time. I think one of the things that you have to remember from the get-go is that you're going to get it wrong, right? You will get it wrong, especially because scaling culture means scaling teams, and that means hiring and interview process is utterly broken. There's a lot of people working on this problem, trying to kind of like tighten it up and trying to make it as foolproof as possible. But utterly, it's a sales process, isn't it? We enter a space, we present ourselves in the best possible light. On the other hand, we've got people who are sort of testing, I suppose, but all sorts of biases kick in, and it's flawed. It's too short. It doesn't really, even if you introduce things like tests or tasks, it doesn't really show you how a person is actually working, what they can actually do. So you have to go by the CV, you have to go by that cover letter, and you have to go by 4 or 5 chats that you're going to have with that person, right? And so sometimes you get it wrong, right? You get people really sort of focused on that gut feel. And I think there's space for gut feel, certainly in the interviewing process, because when something looks like a red flag, it probably is a red flag, but equally you have to sort of recognize your biases and understand that sometimes your gut feel is leading you in the wrong direction. And certainly if you're going to build, if you're going to diversify your teams, you have to kind of step away from that a little bit, and you can't be hiring obviously people who look like you, sound like you, people who make you feel very comfortable. And I think there was advice 10 years ago from a company, I can't remember who gave that nugget of wisdom, just hire people who you wouldn't mind getting stuck at the airport with, right? If you're going to hire for diversity, you have to step away from that a little bit. I always advocate, and this kind of goes a little bit against what I do for a living, I suppose, but I always advocate hiring slow, measured, thoughtful, slow approach to hiring, I think, will mean that you're going to make less of those mistakes, right? The problem is in the VC world, in the VC-backed business, where, an injection of cash comes in almost overnight, and then one of the measures of success is that headcount. Hiring is anything but slow, right? I appreciate how ironic it is that I'm standing here or sitting here advocating for slow listening hiring, where we've hired 105 people this year alone, and that's putting on top of 80 that we were last year, right? So more than doubling the headcount. So I always say, yes, you can put people on those seats, wherever those seats might be these days. But it's what happens after, right? Are you then ready to help them be successful and help them be them best selves and help them really blend into that culture, enrich that culture, make it better, make it bigger, make it more diverse? How ready are you for that step? And the answer quite often is not very ready, actually, because everybody's got their day job, right? So it's bad enough we're asking people to do interviewing now all of a sudden 6 out of 8 hours of their day, but now we're then asking them to kind of like look after those people, onboard those people, manage those people, support those people, create environments for success and that kind of stuff, right? So that bit is really tricky. So yeah.
There's a lot there, right? There's a lot there. And I'm just going to pick at some of those things, Tina. And I completely get what you're saying around going slow to go fast, right? And you find this often in many things. I mean, that's exactly what being agile is often about, because you can, what I find ironic sometimes is you can rush to hire a load of people very quickly, but have a very poor onboarding experience, which then, everything you gained in hiring fast, you've lost because of a poor onboarding experience. And so it's really thinking about that entire employee experience from the get-go. But I just wanted to go at one of the things you mentioned around bias. And I think one of the scary things around bias is obviously the unconscious bias, right? And you've obviously done this at many companies before, but I'm sure in your organization today, there are probably first-time hiring managers who've not gone through this process. So how do you train them to be aware of unconscious bias and realize that they might be hiring someone because it's comfortable to be stuck with them at an airport, right? How do you make them aware of that?
Yeah. Let me just go back 1 second to say, actually, first-time managers, I love those, people who go into managerial role with their eyes open and really excited about helping, empowering, enabling other people. And that's their passion in life. Nothing wrong with that, because they might have a skill missing, so they haven't done this yet, but they've got the will and they've got the passion. So that's a massive plus. The bigger problem is experienced managers who have been doing it wrong for years. Right. I don't know how to put it differently, but who were taught in different companies earlier in their careers to do it in a certain way that, just isn't with the times, shall we say, or doesn't belong in the culture that you're trying to build, or just doesn't really go with the startup way of doing it, right? That's the problem, because there's so much unlearning that you have to do, right? So people who will say to you, oh, I've been interviewing for 20 years. I've been managing people for 20 years. I've got this. Don't you worry, honey. I'm like, oh, wow. Yeah, okay. That's problematic, right? Because I think those are the people who, with everything, including the bias, you'll reach. You'll struggle to reach, right? Because they think they know, and that's the problem. As with anything, like as soon as we think we know, we probably don't know anything, right? Yeah. And the longer I do this job and the longer I'm around, the more I realize that. I'm one of those people who, age 16, thought she's got it all figured out, right? Age 20, I was like, yeah, got this. Totally know what I'm doing.
That's all of us, Tina. That's all of us.
Yeah. And then the longer I proceed, the less I know. So a few things, right? I mean, we do interview training. It's an absolutely mandatory module that everybody has to do at Ensure to be put in front of the candidates. And we're pretty militant at it. Now and again, we make an exception because, again, the speed, right? So we don't want to be known as not flexible. But yeah, the interview training is really important because what somebody thinks they know may not be how we want to do stuff here. Structured interview process is your best friend when it comes to unpicking that bias. The thing is, we all have biases. There is no way you can erase the bias completely, but the most important thing is for you to be aware that you've got them, to pinpoint what they might be, right? So if I'm a mother and then I'm slightly more inclined to empathize with another mother, then I need to know that that's happening so that I can sort of nip it in the bud as much as I can, and so on. So we do the training module. We use, external research. We use a lot of data to show that, if you do this, then this happens. So it's not just kind of like anecdotal, touchy-feely type stuff. I think playing some videos is a really powerful tool. We've got one that we play that is nothing to do with hiring really, but it's just it pulls on people's emotional strings quite nicely. So that really works, and there's been tears before, which is great, because I'm like, okay, that then sent a message. And then the structured interview process, right? Make it as tight as possible so there's as little opportunities for that bias to creep in as possible, right? So don't ever allow people to ask different questions to different candidates. Don't ever allow people to meet someone in a coffee shop and someone else in front of a panel of 3 in a really rigid, formal environment, right? Don't employ small talk. This is something I've learned probably only about 10 years ago. I was definitely big on small talk. I was definitely big on, creating that report, putting the candidate at ease. I remember I was working at Tech Hub at the time, and we were at the 3rd floor. We had to fetch the candidates from the ground floor. So I would spend that elevator journey, which wasn't long, but long enough to be uncomfortable if you say nothing, right? Doing small talk. And yet, I then realized that, because somebody said that they've been to my home country, or because somebody said they're from the same part of town, or because somebody also has a child, I am ever so slightly leaning towards that person. I like them a little bit better, right? It doesn't mean we're going to hire them. And luckily back then I didn't have that power either. But it was really interesting. I went to this conference, and there was a speaker, and I can't remember who it was, and they highlighted this thing around small talk and how we think it's harmless, but actually it's got so much potential to open those doors into that bias. So we're best off just sort of letting it be and not employing any small talk whatsoever.
That's a great point, and I'm definitely going to take that one, Tina. And I like what you said earlier around not just, I guess, the kind of challenge of upskilling first-time managers, but actually more what they would consider seasoned managers, and fighting that inertia of, we know this, right? We've done this for so many years. Now, I guess one way is saying, here's a mandatory interview training. You all have to do it regardless of your experience. But, they might be just ticking a box. Right? How do you actually change that mindset that, you don't know? Things are changing, and you need to be open to the fact that things are changing, and there are new things you can unlearn and learn. How do you tackle that?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I wish I knew. I'm still figuring it out. I mean, I think the danger is quite often when you're living and breathing something, then you forget that not everyone is, their journey is different, right? So I might be over here on my journey with a subject, but someone else is over there. So you need to really kind of like consider where they are, and then almost like tailor the approach to that individual to bring them to that journey. Unfortunately, you don't have the luxury to do that, right? So sometimes it will just have to be, you're going to have to trust us on this one. We know what we're doing. And here is the module. And then I guess with the modules, you just, workshops work better, right? Than top-down training where I preach and someone listens. But for workshops, you also need to be really good at facilitation, and you need to also expect that the result might be slightly different to the one that you've sort of envisaged, right? So you need to be open to that. When it comes to just engaging people, I suppose, throughout a training or a learning experience, I think just diversify the content and diversify and make a lot of create a lot of engagement points. So we do polls, we do chats, we do breakout rooms, we do role plays, we do videos, we do shocking statistics. We enable kind of like conversations. But I if somebody is sort of vehemently against something or think they know better, then that's really hard. And I've definitely had failings in that area where, especially if somebody doesn't want to learn, right? If somebody enters something like that, then it's going to be very, very hard.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, no, makes sense. So just coming back to kind of the culture, right? Now, I guess a big part of hiring for culture and driving behaviors that are aligned with the culture, a lot of that assumes people know what the culture is, right? It all comes down to how you're actually communicating culture. So how do you do that? How do you make sure everyone in the organization is, I guess, a part of creating and defining that culture, and then also driving and supporting behaviors that are aligned with that culture?
Yeah, I think a few things that you should do. I think you need to codify whatever is there, and that can look like writing down your code of conduct. That can look like figuring out those values, making sure that they're the right ones, that they're true. They can be a little bit aspirational, but they can't be completely foreign to what's actually happening, because
Right.
culture is what happens in real terms when nobody is looking, as far as I'm concerned. It's good that these things are written down, but it can't just be someone dreaming this thing up over there that is completely unconnected to what's actually happening in the trenches, right? I think the really important thing is also to be quite honest about it. And also to realize that it's going to change with every single new hire, with every single new person that you bring on board.
Yeah.
The culture will change. And I think that is the really tricky bit, especially when you've hired 105 people, right?
Yeah.
It's very, very hard. I think ideally, every time you get a new hire in your team, you would do an offsite. You would get everyone together. You would go through whatever's documented company-wise or team-wise, your vision, your mission, your values, your ways of working, how do you communicate, your code of conduct, all of that kind of good stuff. But that's often not possible, right?
Right.
So people do need to kind of like figure it out for themselves. And the problem with that is, in a remote setting, that is harder to do than it was in the office. And this is because you can't just observe, right? Because a lot of it is just observing how people are, how people speak to each other, how they interact, how they work together, what kind of happens, right? And for that, you need some sort of physical presence, and you need time as well. And again, with the speed of hiring, you just don't have that luxury, because you're only a new person for a week. And then you're kind of like chucked aside. Oh, you've been here 4 weeks now. You're almost part of the furniture, and you're still kind of finding your grounds. We have worked really hard to figure out our onboarding. That's another thing where you can really pepper in those things of how things are done in a remote setting. So everybody gets, we communicate with candidates way ahead. We communicate throughout. Everyone has like a 2-week, very detailed kind of schedule, consisting both of meeting people, attending various meetings, but also just watching videos and reading documentation. Everybody also gets assigned a buddy. I think that's really helpful.
Right.
Obviously, that will mean that everyone's experience will vary depending on who your buddy is, right? How long they've been around, how they understand that culture, how invested they are in their role of a buddy. But that helps for sure. And then I think another thing is just spend as much time as you can with those new hires in a team setting, in your one-on-ones, to kind of like try and shed a light as much as you can. But these things take time, right? And again, everybody changes the culture a little bit. So what was true a couple of years ago isn't true anymore today. So then you need to kind of think about, how do we now get together, all of us, and figure out what tweaks do we need to make, or what's different now to still be true.
And how do you tackle a situation where, let's just say I've codified the culture, but there are, some managers, or let's even say the founders themselves, who are not really examples of that culture, right? They're not doing, or they're not kind of adhering to what you've codified here. How do you tackle that situation?
Yeah, feedback, right? Feedback is the most powerful thing. Unfortunately, the way we were all brought up, the way our kind of like education system works, or the way our even workplaces have traditionally been set up, feedback is not something that we learn how to do well. It's something that we shy away from as humans, because we want to be liked, and we want to be popular, and we want to be nice, and we focus on being nice rather than being kind to somebody. So I think, it's very hard, and people really struggle with it. And I think culturally also, in certain pockets, it's a hard no, it's a big no. I'm Eastern European personally, so we're a bit more blunt and a bit more direct on a whole. I appreciate I'm generalizing here, but I think that's actually helped me in a lot of ways. Probably not the most popular person in the room at all times, but certainly the one that will tell you if you've got spinach in between your teeth.
We all need one of those around us.
I think we really do. And sometimes that's our parents, right? But then these people kind of like disappear, right? And you might have them in your circle of friends, but at work you often don't have them. And I think that's a massive problem, because that's the first thing that you have at your disposal. And you need to be fairly fearless and pull people up when they're not adhering to that culture, leaving those values, or going against something that you've agreed as a group. And I have this, I would say, almost on a weekly basis. I have these conversations, and you need to then figure out, when are you going to call in and when are you going to call out, because there's certain situations that are appropriate for either. But I think that's the kindest thing you can do, because sometimes it's a case of, oh, I didn't realize. Oh my God, I didn't know that, by me doing this or saying that, or not doing this or not saying that, I'm kind of like damaging what we've built. Sometimes it's a bit more complicated than that. And people just don't see the correlation. I think that's really problematic in our role as well, is that sometimes there isn't a direct correlation. You've got this thing of like, oh, this place feels very different now, or, oh, this place, everyone's kind of leaving and they're not happy anymore.
Right.
And it's very hard sometimes to convey that it's because of all these small things that have accumulated to make this place not a nice place to work anymore, I suppose. Or sometimes it's just the behavior that, a certain founder can portray. That's really powerful. And I think a lot of the time, founders don't really understand how much power they hold, right? Because I think, founders are usually people who have identified a problem. They're problem solvers, right? They have an idea, they build this thing, and then they step into their role of a leader, right? CEO, COO, whatever might have you, right? But they're not that person, and often they don't want to be that person either, but they're kind of like pushed into that person, to be into that role rather, just by kind of circumstances. And I think you then also need to kind of like think about, is this what I really want to be doing, right? Or am I actually a founder by nature and I build something, that I pass it on, build something, pass it on, rather than cling to this baby that is now have grown up to be a teenager and has sort of different needs, and you can't be acting in the same way. And you also have to grow up as a parent.
I found what was helpful for me, Tina, is while we were growing up as a company, was actually as a founder and CEO to say, I don't know. I found that was, I think the early pressures were actually down to the fact that you felt you had to know. You felt like there was an expectation from everyone around you in the organization to have all of the answers. But I think once you realize exactly how any other person in the company is going through their growth with things they know and don't know, it's the same thing for a founder and a CEO. You're learning how to be a leader of an organization, and that's not what your role was. So I found that really helpful for anyone who's listening. But I loved your kind of differentiation around, being kind and nice, the difference there. And I thought that's really, really important point to make. And I guess one of the things it fundamentally comes down to is, do people feel safe enough to be able to give this feedback and I guess receive this feedback without feeling like this is going to have some significant negative repercussions on my career, and that's quite a fragile thing to kind of shape. So how do you go about doing that? How do you create that environment where people feel safe enough to give and receive feedback?
Yeah, absolutely right. There needs to be high levels of trust, and there needs to be incredible amount of psychological safety for people to feel able to give that feedback. And it's slightly easier, I suppose, if you are in a further down your career path. And you know that you've kind of like have some power, and you were brought in to sort of fix a couple of things, and that's your domain, and you can say things. But yeah, you're absolutely right. That's the first thing. If that doesn't exist, then you won't get that open and honest feedback. I think vulnerability is a main thing here. Like you said, admit that you don't know everything. Fine line, right? Because you also need to kind of like portray that you do know what you're doing, and people haven't made this horrific mistake by joining your company. You're kind of running around completely clueless. But I think that's one of the things. Listening, really listening, and acting on what you've heard, even if that means not doing anything about it, right? Even if that means that actually we're not going to go ahead with your proposal or suggestion. And here is why. Giving people context is really important. I think a lot of the time people just need more context. And when they have that, then, they're kind of reassured. You have to be really dependable as well. I think that's a really good trait when it comes to building trust and creating psychological safety. Just basically your intentions and your actions need to match up, right? And quite often that doesn't happen, I think. So just sticking to what you said you were going to do. And it seems really obvious. And of course you're going to do that. But a lot of the time you don't, because there's so many things happening, you're juggling so many balls. It's not that you purposefully don't want to stick to the thing that you say you're going to do, but you might just drop a ball, in which case admit that, right? And I think being very clear with expectations, I think that's also another thing. A lot of managers, I think a lot of leaders stumble on that, and they think that they've been clear, but that message has not been received, which is again where kind of communicating clearly and listening comes in, right? So playing back and saying, this is what I need you to do. This is what I expect you. This is what good looks like in your role in the next quarter, because not everybody is good at asking for that clarity. And so it is our job to give it. And then modeling that feedback and just making people do it. I mean, we do this thing called stop, start, continue. Pretty much every offsite that we do in my team, and it's just this. I don't know if you heard of the model, but it's like speed dating for feedback, I suppose, right? So I just tell you what I would like you to start, what I would like you to stop, and what I would like you to continue doing. Kind of top level, really quick, 2 minutes. You're not supposed to interrupt. You're not supposed to ask any questions. You're just supposed to thank me. And then we swap and you do the same for me. And then the clarifying and digging deeper comes at a later point in another kind of one-on-one. And it's, it's incredibly uncomfortable the first time you do it. People are like, oh my God, this was just really hard. and then guess what? It was also great. And they can't wait to do it again. So, and it's a small one, right? It's a little tiny step. And then with feedback as well, the tip that comes from Simon Sinek, actually, I think, oh no, I'm wrong, Adam Grant. Don't say, do you have any feedback for me? But say, what feedback do you have for me on this podcast that we've just done? Or even, I think he even goes as far as say, score it. The likelihood that you're going to score me a 10 is pretty low. You're going to probably try and be nice to me and say 8, right? And then I can go, oh, so how can I get to 10? Where's that, that space for growth? What could I do better?
Like my feedback on the podcast scene, this is amazing. I could carry on going, but I'm conscious of your time. So we're going to dive into the quick fire round. This is where I'm going to fire some questions at you and you can give me a relatively quick answer, and that will do. The first one for me is, what's the one skill you'd love to develop and why?
Yeah, I think I wish I studied psychology in hindsight. I think it would
Great.
be very helpful to what I do now, but I didn't uh, end up in my role by design. I ended up in my role by accident. So I didn't know. And I think what I'm still learning to do now, sorry, my headphone fell out, is to be a better coach. So to do less directive stuff and more sort of, hands off, asking questions type approach. This is also something I'm still learning.
What's the one thing you knew that you wish you knew at the start of your career? What's the one thing you know now, rather, that you wish you knew at the start of your career?
You know what? That it's okay to be a bit of a generalist. I think there's a book about this. I think it's called Range. I definitely, at some stage in my career, allowed myself to really be convinced that you need to specialize, because that's what everyone around me was saying. That's what everyone around me was doing. And I've since realized actually that that's not necessarily a case. It helps that you get really good at something, sure, but you don't need to be a specialist. You can be a generalist, and that's okay.
Yeah, yeah. What's the best piece of advice someone's given you?
Oh, probably to slow down.
Yeah.
Probably to slow down and to go deep. And it actually came from someone on my team not that long ago, because I think that's something that I need to be reminded of still quite frequently. I just want to speed up and do all these things because I feel like, in a startup universe, you've got this limited window of time, right? I don't have 10 years to build this thing slowly, so I want to do a lot, and sometimes that means not going deep enough. So yeah, that was a good piece of advice.
What's the one skill that you think a first-time manager definitely needs? And I'm also going to, because of our conversation, add, what's the one skill that you think a seasoned manager definitely needs to be able to grow in a company like where you are?
I'll go back to feedback.
Yeah.
To be a manager, which to me means to be a leader, you need to be a feedback ninja. That's the most important thing. But again, listening skills, vulnerability, going first, being brave, and being dependable also all come into play.
What's your best productivity hack?
Oh, it's a few really. Switch those notifications off. For me, in order to remain really productive and to remain sane, also, I need to go as light on meetings as possible, which has been a massive struggle in the last 18 months. Start delegating to others and start working in an async way as well. I think that's a big one, right? Not everything needs to be in real time in a meeting in person. There's a lot of stuff and a lot of tools available that can help you work in an async way. And it will mean that you're in charge of when you do that work. It won't mean you do any less work. It just means that you're a bit more of a master of your time. And then sharpen your axe. Do what you need to do. Take that time out during the week to do what you need to do for you in terms of filling up those energy levels or learning about something that you need to learn about.
My last one for you, Tina, is, what are you most proud of in your career?
There's a lot of things. I think, perseverance, it comes to mind. I moved from Slovenia to UK 15 years ago, and I had to start again because my CV meant nothing. I did all sorts of cool stuff, but it meant nothing because it was all like, well, you didn't do it here. So I really started at the bottom, and I think came quite far in that respect. Really proud of my team currently. I managed to, that sounds a bit big-headed, but we managed to assemble a team of really good people who work really good together. When I talk about psychological safety and high trust in a team, we've got all that. And I've worked in teams where that wasn't the case, so I know the difference very well, and it's pretty magic. I am also really proud of the sort of diversity efforts that we've made and the strides we've made in the last sort of 2 years since I've been here. So we went from 21% to 42%, so doubling when it comes to female representation. Not quite half, but we're getting there. And we are insurtech, so technology and insurance mixed together doesn't make it easier. We've increased our people of color representation to 30%, and very cool 45% of our people managers are female as well.
Amazing.
15 nationalities and a good generational spread as well. So we've got a bit of everything in terms of all these generations. So I'm pretty proud of that. I think that was tricky to do, but definitely doable, as shown on examples. So that's something to be pleased about, I think.
That is something definitely to be proud of, Tina. Tina, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for coming on the show. And hopefully we can chat again, because there's so much more to ask you, but thank you very much.
You're most welcome. Thank you for having me.
And that's a wrap for this week's episode. Thanks so much, Tina, for that conversation. I learned a lot, and there are some great takeaways I'll be implementing myself. If you've liked the episode, then please do subscribe, share, or tell a colleague, as it goes such a long way in helping us grow. You can also find social profiles for myself and Tina in the description below. Thanks, and see you on the next episode.